Hey, how are you today? Good. Glad you're here. Glad you're here. Hello, everyone. A short presentation on a topic that's of great interest to me, as well as many others, would be the, let's call it Hitler's terror weapons, or German secret weapons from World War II, the Wunderwaffen, the Foo-Fighter. This is the topic that we'll be looking at right now, or the Feurkugel, or basically ball lightning. Nazi secret weapon? We will see. A picture of a typical, what later became called the Foo-Fighter, that was seen following Allied and also German aircraft during the war. In Hitler's Germany, aeronautical designer Rudolf Shriver began a project on an unmanned flying disc on or about July 15, 1941. Now, a lot of what I'm presenting here is basically coming from an excellent treatise written by Jeffrey Brooks, Hitler's Terror Weapons from the 6 to Vomana. The model developed by Shriver was completed on June 2, 1942, and made its maiden voyage the next day, exhibiting excellent flying qualities. It was propelled by a hydrogen peroxide engine, was remote controlled, and took off and landed vertically. Near the end of 1942, the Waffen-SS laboratory at Wiener Neustadt began trials on what was called a strange anti-aircraft weapon. The project, which is still kept classified in Allied archives, was known as the Feurkugel, and also could be referred to as the Kugelblitz, or ball of fire, or ball lightning as we now refer to it. Those were the original terms coined by the Germans. The limited amount of information does link it to Shriver's unmanned flying saucer design. This is Shriver. There is a single official U.S. report on the subject. There is a 1946 document which was obtained through the Freedom of Information Act, obtained by Henry Shuren, and it was reported by him in UFO Focus in the March 31, 1991 issue. This weapon was not ready to enter service until March of 1945, and it turned out to be too late to be of use to the Third Reich. It was described as an anti-aircraft rocket designed by Richard Haas and developed via the Verwertungsgesellschaft in Salzburg. The object was reported to seek its target automatically and was being prepared for use around January of 1945. A British report, BIOS, final report number 61 in Weapons, Volkenrode, reviewed various documents prepared by the SS and work centers of the Henschel and Zeppelin aircraft companies, the latter which was installed in underground facilities towards the end of the war in the Black Forest. These documents refer specifically to a propulsion unit built for the Kugelblitz by Professors Kamm and Ernst at the Kreislaufbetrieb Motor DW in 1943 for the FFKF Stuttgart unter Turkheim. This is a Walter engine. And there's a German helicopter. We will talk about them later in the lecture. It was described by the British team as a recycled oxygen system. It was later replaced by, indeed, the Walter turbine using hydrogen peroxide, although the document describes both possibly being used in a single unit system. The remaining information in the document regarding the configuration, length, diameter, warhead, speed of ascent, operational altitude, etc. remains classified to this day. Vesco had not seen a Kugelblitz prototype. but pieced together enough information to know it was stabilized gyroscopically and had a missile guidance system developed by the Flugfunkforschungsanstalt of the Reich Post at Oberpfaffenhofen, and also had a homing system. It was unmanned and rose rapidly vertically. It may have had its effect by discharging and instantly igniting a blue plasma based on the fire-damp gas found in coal mines. It was first tried out against Allied bombers over Lake Garda. Vesco reported that it was known as a flying turtle to the local German sources, which described it as being a turtle shell when not in motion. In flight, during the day, it resembled a luminous disk spinning around its own axis, and it looked like a burning balloon at night. Now, please recall that the term flying saucer was not coined until about 1947, when Arnold saw them flying, these disc-like, he described them as skipping over water when he saw them on the west coast of the United States. So this turtle shell does give us a mental image of what was being seen and reported. On December 24th, Christmas Eve, 1944, over the Rhine Valley, RAF crew members, Lieutenants Cleary and Gibbons, were surprised by a red flaming ball which suddenly turned into an airplane, and the upper half was built like a wing. The remainder of the account is still censored. Now, what sort of weaponry is a fiery ball with no firm shape that changes configuration in motion? It is clear from Vesco's account that the flying turtle and the Feurkugel were related. One actually seemed to become the other in flight. By some mechanism, the unmanned, remote-controlled Kugelblitz changed its morphology, developed a bright halo, well, could that be atmospheric ionization, and acquired an ability to hover motionless. The flying turtle was reported to house a number of klystron tubes, the purpose being to home in on enemy aircraft. Now, klystron these days is used, interestingly enough, in microwave ovens to generate an intense and local microwave field used for cooking purposes, and applied to a suitable surface at a given frequency, it will generate a halo-like plasma, so the effect at least is possible. Now here in our chemistry department labs over the years, I've shown students the generation of a so-called plasma ball, and you can find this on YouTube. Simply taking a piece of cork with a piece of lead from a lead pencil. It's not actually lead, it's graphite. Stick it in the cork, put a glass beaker Pyrex over it, microwave it for 30 seconds, and it will generate a plasma ball, a plasmoid. And interestingly enough, it also gives off sound. Now you can find these so-called plasmoids videos on the internet, YouTube. Now, Lieutenant General Massey in 1943 in Britain investigated reports of Allied pilots who described being harassed from balls of fire during European operations. It is believed that such fireballs were filmed for British intelligence in very high definition on several occasions, but none have ever been released. In 1946, a classified inquiry was set up by British investigators, assisted by Dr. Ernst Westermann, a director at Speer at Saarbrücken, to file a report on the German Foo-Fighters, but nothing was ever reported. This is a hang glider, Horton, Horton brothers. A typical report filed by an Allied pilot. Here we hear from B.C. Lumsden. He was piloting a Hurricane Interceptor in early December 1942. At about 2,000 hours, over the mouth of the Somme, I saw two steadily climbing orange lights, moving slower than tracer flak. I did a full turn, but saw the lights astern and to port, but they appeared larger and brighter. At a height of 7,000, an altitude of 7,000 feet, they stopped climbing and remained level. I did some more turns, but the objects hung behind me. I nosedived to 4,000 feet, and the lights kept the same position in pursuit. Finally, they descended to about 1,000 feet below me until I leveled out, at which point they climbed again and resumed pursuit. The two lights seemed to maintain an even distance from each other and varied in relative height. One was always slightly a bit lower than the other. Once I hit 260 mph, I was able to outdistance them. It seemed to be the purpose of these objects to fly in parallel formation with the reporting aircraft and hover at wingtips. USAF pilot Wendell Stevens recalled, "They were grayish-green or reddish-orange color. They would approach to within 15-20 feet from the aircraft and stay there. They could not be shaken off, nor could they be shot down." Now please keep in mind, viewer, there were hundreds of sightings, and it seems between November 1944 and January 1945, every single pilot in the American 415th Night Fighter Squadron had seen the phenomenon at least once. In a heavily censored AP release dated 12/13/1944, now this is 9 days before the well-known Hagenau sighting, Allied pilots reported seeing over the Reich mysterious silvery balls which just seemed to float in the air, singly and in clusters. B-17 pilot Charles Ogden, who saw them over Germany, described them as crystal balls about the size of a basketball, which would approach to within 300 feet of the bomber formation and then seem to become magnetized and fly alongside. After a time, they peel off like a plane and leave. Although seen mostly at night, some airmen indeed saw them during the day. They never showed up on radar, and common explanations such as reflections, St. Elmo's fire, flares, etc., were all discounted. What was being seen was never seen before. It was suspected that the fireballs were a German anti-aircraft weapon to foul ignitions and interfere with radar, but if so, they appeared ineffective, and German captured pilots also reported being harassed by them. It was concluded that the fireballs represented some type of weapon early in development. Now, when the fireballs peeled away and plunged into a steep dive, what actually did they do next? On March 25, 1945, elements of the 6th Armored Division dug in south of Darmstadt, and they were overlooking the Autobahn when they saw 6 or 7 bright yellow-orange circular objects approach the Autobahn from the west at an altitude of about 150 feet. They were not in formation, but they were traveling in the same direction. Each had its own erratic movement, as if they were being individually controlled. They were 3 to 4 feet in diameter, and so bright they illuminated trees that were around them. The observers went on to say that the balls descended slowly at about 10 miles per hour until entering deep into the forest, where they just disappeared. These balls of fire were also seen in the Pacific during and after the war. German naval forces from 1942 onwards had large U-boat and transport bases on the coasts of Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore, and mainland Japan, which could explain even the wartime sightings in the region, in the Pacific theater. Now, how did the Feurkugel or ball lightning work? In the normal course of events, the British authorities were due to release the Kugelblitz Feurkugel papers in 1975. Traditionally, 30 years classified documents are released. The failure to release those reports at the 30-year mark is obviously some kind of bad sign. The so-called Foo-Fighter was a small aerial machine which appeared to do nothing except change direction in flight. It remained invisible to radar and could not be shot down. This is the characteristic of the modern UFO, and as the existence of UFOs is denied by London or Washington, or at the very least ignored, it would be logical to declassify the papers. Observations after the war of such objects seem to indicate a variance between being physical and paraphysical at different times. Late in 1942, when the German leadership had accepted that the planned objectives of the war were no longer obtainable, the Waffen-SS began trying out aerial machines which London and Washington would not want to discuss, obviously. It would certainly cause demoralization. The Kugelblitz Feurkugel project was an experimental stage of the German flying disc program. What must have been learned by chasing and homing in on Allied aircraft across another dimension over the Reich territory and the Access Pacific airspace during 1943-44 was put into practice aboard the real thing at a later date. Meanwhile, German aeronautical engineers had worked 24/7 on the project, for which the Foo-Fighters were the first stage, and what followed was the search for more perfect shapes. Germany was the world pioneer in helicopter development, and in 1942, the Flettner 282 Colibri became the first helicopter anywhere to enter military operation. The German supersonic helicopter had a system in which the fuel was piped to combustion chambers at the rotor blade tips, where it exploded, whirling the blades at fantastic speeds. Germany led the world in helicopter theory, practice, and design. Within 30 months from July 1942, German engineers designed and built several giant circular aircraft, which were basically autogyros and first flew in 1945. The Treaty of Versailles from 1919 had so drastically restricted German aircraft production that glider flying became important for pilot training and research and development. The Horton brothers in 1933 actually built in their parents' home and built and test flew their first glider. All three brothers went on to become Luftwaffe officers and members of the Nazi Party. During World War II, their designs formed part of a special glider unit for Operation Sea Lion, the Battle of Britain. In 1942, at the request of the Luftwaffe, they built a stronger and larger version of the so-called Ho-5 to take a Schmidt-Argus pulse jet engine. The design was called the Ho-7. At about the same time as Shriver's autogyric blueprint, they were designing a strange crescent-shaped Ho-6 parabola. I showed you that in the image earlier in this lecture. A mysterious fire occurred that year in the Heiligenberg plant, and no more was heard about the project until 1947. Interestingly enough, at that time, in 1947, the United States Air Force was quite eager to interview Reimar Horton, who by then had escaped to Argentina and was certainly not available for discussion. Thanks for listening to this short episode, and we will upload more videos of this type regularly to YouTube. Basic topics are Hitler's terror weapons or German secret weapons from World War II and the implications from 1945 until the present time. Thank you so much for listening. Bye now.